Labor Alliance, the DC chapter, and the South Asian Bar Association of DC. So before we get started, let me just do like a minor housekeeping. So everybody knows bathrooms are down the hall to your left. There is food, you should help yourself to the food throughout. And also just so everyone is aware, this event is also being recorded. If anyone has any concerns about that, they can see any one of our staff members. And I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Jasmeet, but before I do, I just want to tell you a little bit about South Asian Americans Leading Together. We are a national nonprofit organization that is nonpartisan, and we really work to elevate the voices of South Asian Americans in the United States. We engage in various forms of advocacy, building partnerships with South Asian organizations and allies around the country, part of which we do through our National Coalition of South Asian Organizations, which is approximately 40 organizations around the country that work on the ground with the South Asian community. We work on mobilizing communities to take action. We work on leadership development, and then of course we work on policy areas as well, which is where this immigration piece comes in. In addition to immigration reform, we also work on post-9/11 backlash and hate crimes, civic engagement, gender equity, and profiling, and then of course immigration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmeet, who is going to moderate our panel today.
Welcome everyone, good evening, and thanks for attending. Again, my name is Jasmeet Sidhu, and I'm a law and policy consultant with SALT. As Minar mentioned, we're in a heightened political moment with immigration. And as many of you are aware, the Senate has passed its immigration bill recently, and there are a lot of really robust discussions about what's going to happen next in the House. There's more bipartisan support for immigration than ever before, and most immigrant rights advocates believe that if immigration reform is ever going to happen, the time is now. And so tonight we're going to be discussing a little bit more about the reform. We as a community of South Asians are significantly affected by discussions in Congress around immigration, and many of us have been following this discussion closely. South Asians have a significant presence in the United States with a population of around 3.4 million, which has grown over 81% in the last decade. The DC metropolitan area specifically is home to the 5th largest South Asian population in the country, and 3/4 of South Asians are foreign-born, and so frequently encounter challenges within the immigration system. Taking all this into account, it's likely that either you have been born outside of the United States or you have a family member or friend or colleague who was, and this means that virtually every South Asian is touched by the country's immigration system in some way. It may be that you're an H-1B engineer who's waiting for an employment-based green card, or a US citizen waiting to sponsor a family member living abroad, or a spouse unable to gain work authorization because of the terms of her dependent visa, or a Muslim community member's immigration application is being subjected to heightened scrutiny in the post-9/11 era, or you're an undocumented young student who's in immigration limbo, despite the fact that the only home you've ever known is here in the United States. Virtually every immigration issue that you can think of affects someone in the South Asian community. And while we can't discuss every single one of these issues tonight, we're hoping to spotlight a few of the more pressing issues that are relevant to South Asian Americans. While speaking at an event honoring Asian American heritage recently, President Obama said in reference to immigration reform that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders helped to build this country, helped to defend this country, and helped to make America what it is today. But how will fixing our broken immigration system affect the South Asian community? How are South Asians faring within our current immigration system? What's the fate of our youth who are undocumented but striving to get high school and college degrees? What's the fate of workers who left legitimate positions due to abuse and are now undocumented? What's the fate of H-1B and H-4 visa holders who dream of coming to the United States for a chance at better opportunities and achievements in their fields of expertise? How long is it taking for us to get our families reunited, to sponsor siblings, spouses, and children who remain abroad? These are all questions we hope to discuss this evening, and again, unfortunately, since there's so many pieces of our immigration system that need to be fixed in order to truly benefit South Asians and immigrants as a whole, we won't be able to get to all of them today. Instead, we'll be touching on just a few key issues, but we welcome a discussion about additional issues within our immigration system that you think need reform as well. We want this event to be the beginning of a conversation among community members where we address the effects of immigration policies within our community, discuss and exchange ideas about potential improvements and setbacks moving forward, and most importantly, engage with each other and share perspectives and rally around a call to action so that we as a community can effect change in the coming months as the fate of immigration reform hangs in the balance and is debated on Capitol Hill. So just to set the stage for tonight's format, we're going to start off with some local community members who have very graciously volunteered to share their own personal experiences with the immigration system and how it has affected them and their families. And then we're going to move to a panel discussion among advocates and experts connecting their stories to the larger immigration debate. And then we're going to open it up to question and answer so that we can have an open discussion on the issue. And time permitting, we'll maybe do an advocacy exercise that will help us all think about the current pieces of immigration reform and the ways in which we can make our voices heard. So does anyone have any questions before we get started about any logistics? No? Okay, so without further ado, we're going to kick off the program with Pratishtha Khanna, who's been kind enough to share her experience as an undocumented student who hopes to someday become a citizen. Pratishtha?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pratishtha Khanna, and I'm a documented dreamer, and I'll be starting my senior year at University of Maryland, Baltimore County tomorrow as a biology major. When I was asked to address everyone here today regarding immigration, I couldn't have thought of a more apt timing. As this past weekend, we celebrated 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, and as we welcome September with new hopes to celebrate history 50 years from now regarding immigration reform. I migrated to the United States from India when I was 10 and a half years old, with two very hardworking parents who harbored the desire to make the American dream a reality for their children. And perhaps another thing, perhaps the most important thing, and something that's not so emotionally eloquent, a valid visa and a passport. With every wave of change comes great turmoil. However, this country is the only country on the planet that allows its inhabitants to openly voice their concerns and practice basic rights. Notice how I said inhabitants and not illegal aliens. I'm sure none of us here, documented, undocumented, flew down from Venus or Mars. Am I with everyone on that? Usually when the media personifies immigration or when we hear the debate of immigration, we are only shown the picture of illiterate Hispanic migrants crossing the border with desperate situations and upon arrival residing in one-room allotments with upwards of 7 to 10 people sharing amenities. Even they don't live that way. Amidst this picture, we count out adolescents that arrived here as children with educated parents, now well blended in fabric of the American society, and we sadly count out the struggle of not being accepted into four-year universities, regardless of being amongst the top 5% of classes, the inability to acquire a driver's license due to not having valid state IDs, or the generation of older siblings that had to be the parents after school to younger ones due to parents taking on 14 to 16 hours work shift on minimum wages, and parents who have missed out on children's birthdays, anniversaries, or religious holidays because they work long hours and they need the money to pay rent and provide 3 meals a day. Our community makes up a large portion of those 60% of undocumented immigrants that validly landed here. However, due to lack of knowledge about the following procedures or being misguided by employers and lawyers who falsely file cases are now facing perhaps the most debilitating conditions when living day-to-day lives. After being misguided by a lawyer who's now a permanent resident of a federal prison, my father made it very clear I'm no exception to going to college. I will pursue my American dream of practicing medicine one day. I soon realized history was not just a subject. being undocumented, still going to college, and will pursue my American dream. Now that's an enthralling history class. I finally saw the hopes of that dream becoming a reality last year as President Obama announced his executive order, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, to provide relief to millions of undocumented immigrants like myself with Social Security numbers and work authorization. Since a total of 400,562 applications have been approved, of which we, by which I mean South Korean youth, Philippines youth, India, and Pakistani youth, make up 31% of those applications that have been approved. Today, I am one step closer to my American dream. Due to being DACA-mented, I worked full-time this summer, paid taxes. It's something new, very new to me. My dream of going to medical school still hangs in the balance, as I'm only provided with temporary relief and I must be a permanent resident or green card holder to make that dream a reality. Unless we all stand up and make our voices heard, unless we educate Capitol Hill about a national shared immigration problem, that dream will unlikely be a reality. Thank you so much for doing
I'm glad to hear that you were ultimately able to attend college and achieve part of your American dream. There are so many challenges that undocumented South Asians face in the United States, though the stereotype is usually that most undocumented persons are Latino. In fact, there are over 240,000 undocumented individuals from India alone in the United States, and the undocumented story is very much a South Asian story. Next, we're going to hear from Yves Gomez, another undocumented youth and student activist who's offered to share his story with us as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Yves Gomez and I'm currently an intern at the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, PALA, and I've been a long-term volunteer with CASA Maryland. That's where I learned all of my organizing. I've been a Maryland resident for almost, 20 years, my whole life. My parents came to this country in 1994 seeking opportunity, better opportunity that they did not have growing up in poverty in India and Bangladesh. I remember my earliest memories, everything I know has been in the United States of America. I honestly didn't know that I was undocumented because my parents, because they had an ongoing asylum case, they were always able to get work permits. So I realized that I was undocumented, or it really hit me in 2006 when our papers ran out, when our immigration case was denied. And my parents had to start working under the table. Quit their jobs, quit their education, just like so many undocumented families do. And then in 2008, my father was driving home from work one night, and he was pulled over because he had a blown taillight. And next thing I know, 5 days later, Immigration and Customs Enforcement raided our home. And that's the last time I ever saw my father. My mother and I were taken into detention for almost 10 hours, but we were let out because my younger brother's a U.S. citizen. He was all alone. Ultimately, in 2009, both of my parents were deported, and I've been here ever since. Tomorrow is going to be my parents' 22nd anniversary, and I don't really know how to put it into words, but I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and know that the only way I can really celebrate their anniversary is through an e-card and a UPS delivery, and that hurts a lot. But I'm still here, and even though I was supposed to be deported in 2010, I'm still here because my community rallied behind me. And that's why I thank all of you for being here today, is because I'm just a kid with a story, but my voice, my struggle would never have been heard were it not for your civic responsibility, for your civic engagement, for going out into the community and letting our elected officials, letting the rest of our community know that this issue is so imperative, not just for Yves Gomez, but for 11 million other folks who live in this country. And this upcoming month, as we wait for this immigration bill to pass and we have to remind our politicians, we have to remind our community that this is urgent, that people cannot wait, people cannot no longer live in fear. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eves. Your story really highlights some of the challenges faced by undocumented youth in the U.S. whose family members also don't have status. We've heard from two young undocumented people, often referred to as dreamers, which we'll talk about more shortly. But before we do, I want to welcome our last speaker who will be sharing her personal story, Minnie Leslie. Minnie will be telling us about her experience coming to the United States for what she thought would be a legitimate work opportunity that would allow her to better provide for her family back home in Kerala. Minnie only speaks in Malayalam, so our executive director, Deepa, will be translating for her.
Thank you. And I just wanted to also add my welcome to everyone for being here and for joining us. And hope that we'll have a really, really great discussion. And just want to say how brave it is to hear the stories that we've just heard of the two students that we just heard from. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories. It means a lot to us, so thank you. And Minnie now is someone else who also has the courage to share a story that's very personal and very emotional, but a story that we need to hear and that we need to really respond to in some way. So I also want to thank Casa de Maryland for really doing the work that you all do in the community with South Asian immigrants and with all immigrants, really. So thank you for being a force for us in Maryland. I've asked Minnie to tell her story in Malayalam, and then I'm going to summarize the highlights of it that are relevant to our conversation here, and she said that that's okay. So I'll first turn it over to Minnie.
എൻ്റെ പേര് മിന്നി ലെസ്ലി. എൻ്റെ നാട് ഇന്ത്യ. ഞാൻ കുവൈറ്റുകാരുടെ കൂടെയാണ് ഞാനിവിടെ വന്നത്. ഞാൻ വന്ന
Stories. I think it really gives a face to all of the very real issues that are involved in this immigration debate. It's not just a policy debate, it's a debate and legislation that's going to affect real people in their everyday lives. So I want to just do another round of applause for all the speakers and thank them for taking the time. Perhaps many of their experiences are ones that you're familiar with, or you have friends or family members that have gone through similar situations. Maybe you've learned that the challenges that the South Asian community faced are greater than what you thought they were earlier. If you weren't convinced about how important immigration reform and the conversation is to the South Asian community before, hopefully after this diverse set of stories, you are now. So now we're going to change gears a little bit, and we'd like to place the larger immigration reform conversation in kind of a broader societal and political context through our panel discussion. We are joined by three very well-respected experts in the field. Manar Waheed is SALT's policy director and works on immigration, civil rights, profiling, and gender equity issues as they relate to the South Asian community. Manar is a seasoned attorney and policy advocate who has a background in domestic violence, immigrant rights, and gender issues. Manar, if you want to wave to everyone.
Hi, I'm seasoned.
Sheena Wadlan is the legal program manager of Casa de Maryland, the largest immigrant rights organization in Maryland. Sheena is a committed social justice attorney who has dedicated her career to organizing and representing low-income people of color. She joined CASA in 2011 as a staff attorney specializing in workers' rights. In addition to serving on the board of the Asian American Bar Association, Sheena served as the vice president of the South Asian Bar Association of Northern California, and the Minority Bar Coalition awarded Sheena with the Unity Award in 2010. Sheena has the trifecta with being able to speak Hindi, Punjabi, and Spanish, so she can probably engage with a lot of the audience today. And finally, Sheena, do you want to wave to everyone? Finally, we have Angel Colon Rivera. He's an immigration caseworker with Senator Ben Cardin's office. He was previously a congressional policy advisor working on issues related to human trafficking, immigration, housing, and homelessness. Angel has written numerous publications on immigration and workers' rights and has a PhD in social and community psychology from the University of Puerto Rico. So welcome, Angel. We're going to get started with Sheena, and each of the panelists is just going to talk a little bit about their work with their specific organization and how it relates to the immigration conversation.
legal services on the ground to immigrants. So for example, in Minnie's case, getting the wages back, fighting to find any sort of immigration relief. We help victims of trafficking and other domestic workers. We've had very good success, largely due to our organizing component, which is the heart of what Casa de Maryland does. And we've got Antonia, who's our domestic worker organizer here in the crowd, who's incredible, amazing in terms of reaching out to women who, they don't share a single language, but they form these bonds that are unbreakable, and she's able to go and build that trust and rescue women who are so afraid to leave their abusive situations. Casa also does a lot of work around stopping deportations. Why? For the very reason you see here. The separation, the tearing apart of families is frankly un-American, right? It's disgusting and it's un-American, and no kid should have to suffer what Eve suffered, right? So we fight to try to keep families together, and how do we do that, right? Very little legal means. The cases come to us when every legal sort of avenue has been exhausted, so we go in the streets. Eves gets together with 100 students and we write letters, and Anhil here helps us from where he sits, and Salt helps us from where they sit, right? We pull together creative coalitions to really put every single pressure that we can on the agency, on the government to do what's right and not separate families, not focus on deporting people who the government has made as their own policy, their own stated policy of DHS is that they're going to prioritize. They've got, hundreds and thousands of people in a line to be deported, and they say we will focus on those who have committed crimes. We will not focus and spend all these resources on deporting people who have been here many years, law-abiding, have US citizen children, have ties to this community, and we still have to fight, right? It's their own policy, they don't follow it, so we've got to be at the front line fighting to stop these deportations. So those are the ways in which we help on the ground in the community, and then we have a lobbying arm, Casa in Action, which is a sister organization that's able to do the real raising of the money, old school lobbying, which we are also working on around this bill. But the most important thing, and if you guys were out in Washington this Saturday, I was, what a reminder that the most important thing is that each of you here go home and talk to everyone you know, and every single one, call your congressperson, write a letter, donate online, sign a petition, because it matters and it does make a difference. And because of that sort of action, we're able to keep families together, right? Which makes a difference for the entire lives of the children in that family. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge, how much effort and work really goes into doing the direct services, representing people, taking on individual cases. Unlike Casa de Maryland, we kind of do like that other arm that you have a sister organization that does around policy advocacy at SALT. So we do a lot of coalition building as well with organizations like Casa. We do a lot of work on the Hill, and I just want to talk a little bit about the areas of immigration reform that we're really focused on. We at SALT really believe in holistic immigration reform, and what I mean by that is immigration reform that is all-encompassing. There are so many pieces of our system that are broken, and there's no one piece that can be fixed without fixing the others, nor is there any one piece that can be fixed and help the South Asian community. We need all of the pieces to really be fixed in order for it to be beneficial to our community as well as all immigrant communities. And I also want to acknowledge, we had 3 people speak, 2 dreamers and 1 person speak who's an additional person speak that's undocumented. And I just want to acknowledge that I think a lot of why we're here in this moment right now with immigration reform and why this is a reality that could happen is because of the DREAM movement and because of all of the advocacy and efforts that they put forth for years on end, and the marches and the rallies around the country and meeting with the president, and they took it to every level in a way that not only advocated for Dreamers specifically, but also for undocumented people generally and for all other facets of immigration reform as well. Like Jasmeet was saying, there's a large and rapidly growing South Asian population in the United States. And we have over 3.4 million people that are South Asian here, and we know that about 3/4 of them are foreign-born. So we know that there are people of various statuses here that are South Asian. So we have undocumented people, we have dependent and temporary workers, we have refugees, asylees, people who come here through the family-based system, LPRs, US citizens. I think very often, I kind of bring up all of those because I think very often South Asians are stereotyped as only benefiting from what's called STEM visas, science, technology, engineering, and math degrees, those being kind of the focus, and that being where people seem to think all the South Asians are, and so if we fix that piece, the South Asian community benefits. And it's not to say that we don't benefit from that. We do have a significant population of people that fall into that category, but we also have people that fall into all the other categories as well. And we have people that are doctors and engineers. We also have people that are taxi drivers and janitors and convenience store owners. We make up such a variety of people, and that's really a big piece of why we need holistic immigration reform to address all the issues. Two things that I just wanted to highlight in terms of, now that I've said that we really want to see all of them, two pieces that I just wanted to highlight. One of which is, and I think we're going to get into some more detail about both of these, but changes to our family-based system. We currently have in this country about 4.3 million people waiting to be reunited with their families through our family-based system, and 1.8 million of those people are Asian Americans generally. So not only are significant populations of South Asians part of that waiting to be reunited with their family, but also those areas everything is kind of interlaced and it all overlaps. So for example, if somebody comes here through our employment-based system, they have family members that they want to bring over through our family-based system. And I think part of what's lost in the dialogue around immigration is that it's very economically driven. In all the conversations online, on the news, a lot of what the focus we hear, or that I hear, is really about like helping our economy, and that's why we have the focus on STEM degrees, that's why we have the focus on high-skilled labor. And I think what we're losing sight of is not only the cultural and diversity piece that other immigrants bring to our country who come in through different ways, but also the fact that those things don't operate in a vacuum. And when we have somebody that comes in through the employment-based system, they're going to be better able to succeed with their families here. And people that come in through our family-based system still work, they still contribute to our economy. The founders of Google and Intel are people that did not come here through our employment-based system. They came through our family-based system or as asylees or refugees. So I think we lose sight of the people, and the debate gets really focused on the economics. The other thing that I just wanted to acknowledge is the profiling piece that we're also going to talk a little bit more about, I hope. And really just acknowledge that, post 9/11, the South Asian community has faced a lot of scrutiny in terms of profiling, whether that's by local law enforcement, whether it's through like methods of surveillance in the New York City area or elsewhere, or whether we're talking about through immigration enforcement. And that is something that we have continued to see increasingly over the years, and something that really has to be addressed through our immigration reform in order to prohibit profiling and make it a very clear prohibition so that our community's civil rights are protected, so that we can call the police when we have an issue. And also just to acknowledge that those methods of profiling have proven ineffective over and over again.
Well, I probably have the least exciting job with this panel. Basically, I work for Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, a Democrat. I do primarily his immigration casework, and that basically means I am the person that you contact. I'm your first line of advocacy between, in representation of the senator to the various agencies that deal with either immigration or foreign embassies. So the scope of the work that I do is between people who are under threat of detention and deportation. I help assist people who are having issues with their work visas, people who are trying to come into the country and for whatever reasons have been delayed, people who are trying to adopt foreign-born children, as well as people who have been victims of human trafficking and victims of child abduction. So if you are a citizen or permanent resident whose child has been abducted and taken across overseas, and you need the assistance from the center, I'm the center's front line. Interestingly enough, I thank you, the South Asian American League of Leading Together. I'd like to thank you for inviting the senator and inviting me, especially since, interestingly enough, although I am Latino, although Latinos and Latinas constitute the greater portion of the largest minority group in the United States, and I believe the third largest minority here in the state of, here in the state of Maryland. Most of the people who actually reach out to the center seeking assistance are actually of South Asian descent, South Asian and African. So it's a great privilege for me to be here in front of you all and to kind of get some of the stories of what some of you or your families have been through. And that puts it in perspective to me. I take these stories back to the center, and my job is easy because unfortunately I work for a boss who is on the right side of the issues, and we work for the great state of Maryland, which most of us are on the right side of the issues. But unfortunately, as the front line for the senator, there are also loud voices against immigration reform. There are also loud voices for people for border security, for enhanced border security, to detain and deport people. And so I implore from you right now to not only to contact your elected officials and be that louder voice.
Thanks, Angel, and thanks to all the panelists for taking time out of your, I'm sure, busy schedules to be with us tonight. We just want to, before we open it up to question and answer for the larger audience, we want to just pose a few questions to the panel to just hone in on some specifics within their expertise. So far we've heard a little bit about the pathway to citizenship, but I want to return our attention to one of the issues that Manar had mentioned within the family-based system. Sheena, if you can you tell us a little bit about what some of the potential changes with regard to family-based immigration are and how that's going to affect the South Asian community?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Yes. And I'll just speak off mic. So one of the big issues, and I know they're laughing because I'm known to have the loudest voice in my office. One of the big issues with this bill that I think is a particular concern to our community is that under the bill, so this is not a law yet, right? So it's important to note it's not a law yet. It is the proposed bill, the Senate bill, gets rid of a large part of family-based access to visas, which is sort of the siblings. So, for example, when you're able to, once you have status, petition a brother or a sister. I know that my entire family, my entire extended family, came through those types of visas. So it was one uncle, my mother's oldest brother, and he slowly, through him, we were all petitioned to come, first to Canada and then to the US. So I know, at least for me, none of us, I would not be here but for that type of visa. And I think that that's the case for many South Asian families, because look, we are not an individualistic culture. We are a very communal living culture. We live together as extended families. So there may be a perspective where someone would say, oh, a brother or a sister is not your immediate family, but try telling that to my family, right? So for us, these relationships are so close and are many times as important as a mother or as a child, right? In terms of our ability, our contentment, and our ability to support each other. And I think that you'll find the data backs this up in many ways in terms of when families have those supportive structures, they're much more able to thrive. For example, childcare these days. The cost of it is incredibly high. But when families live together, when they have an extended family close by, people are able to share those responsibilities and work more outside the home. So there are all sorts of sort of practical, logical ways in which that type of visa makes sense. And so I think that is something for everybody to be thinking about.
And if I can I add to that? The one thing that I just wanted to add is that those sibling visas and also visas for adult married children, as the bill that passed the Senate, actually let me back up for a second. So as most of you probably know, there was a bill that was introduced back in April, and now it has actually, a variation of that original bill has passed in the Senate. So now we're actually waiting for the House to come up with some kind of bill or a piecemeal approach, which seems to be what they're doing. And then once the House passes one or however many bills, then the two will have to be reconciled in something called conference before something can be voted on by both houses. So that's just kind of where we are right now. We're waiting on the House right now. But the bill that Sheena was just talking about in the Senate currently eliminates opportunities for U.S. citizens to apply for their siblings overseas to come to the U.S. and adult married children as well. And those are two really big categories that impact South Asians. Only from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh alone, we know that there are over 550,000 people waiting through those categories. And depending on what country you're from, you can wait extended periods of time. And I believe the longest wait is about 21 years for people that are from the Philippines. Sorry. This is like if I'm a U.S. citizen and my brother is overseas and I want to petition for my brother. Right now I can do that. I'll have to wait a long time, but through the bill that passed, I won't be able to do that anymore. There'll be a grace period, and the people that are pending will still have their applications go through, but after a certain amount of time, it won't be an option anymore.
So anyone out there, file those now.
Thanks, Sheena and Minar, and also just for providing some kind of framework, I think, for all of us to kind of navigate what's going on Capitol Hill. And as Sheena mentioned with the family system, that's an avenue through which a lot of South Asians come to the United States, but they also come through our employment-based system, the immigration system, which is also, as many of you are probably aware, in need of some major changes. So, Minar, if I could turn to you to discuss what are some of the potential changes to the employment system, including specifically H-1Bs and dependent spouses known as H-4s, and will they be helpful? Who stands to benefit from those changes, and who might we be leaving out? Sorry for the compound question.
That's okay. I love to talk. So I think both in our family system and our employment system, we have these incredible backlogs, like I was talking about with the wait time. And that's also true within our employment-based system. So there are a variety of problems. Oh, thank you. I'm like yelling. There are a variety of problems with the employment-based system as it stands, including the fact that there are really long backlogs, there are country caps, there are job mobility restrictions, and I think the reason that we highlight the H-1B issue is because there are so many South Asians that come to this country as H-1Bs, which are specialty workers. There are wage and hour violations through that process as well, and then there's a lot of restrictions in whether or not you can change your job. So if I come here as an H-1B and I work at my job for 5, 6, 7 years and I want a different job, I want a promotion within my company, whatever that is, that's going to set me back in my process to my green card. So those are some of the pieces. There are a lot of details within them, but those are some of the bigger pieces that are really problematic in our employment system. And they apply not just to the H-1Bs, but also to science, technology, math, engineering students, employment-based green cards, entrepreneurs. There are similar issues within all those systems. So in terms of the Senate bill, one of the good things that it does is that it would clear some of those, it would clear the backlogs. It would remove many of the country caps. It would allow for more job mobility. It would create more protections for workers in situations like minis, I would hope. There are protections around people who are coming to the U.S. To kind of like verify the pretenses under which they're coming and make sure that the employers are actually going to do right by them. There are also protections in the bill around worker exploitations, like what Minnie was facing as well. I think some of the major concerns around the employment-based system are that, so it does increase the number of H-1Bs substantially. There is some tension between that and workers' rights protections for American workers, and there are provisions in the Senate bill that passed that have been put in place to kind of ensure that American workers, if they're qualified, would get the first shot at those jobs. I think the other really big thing that is concerning a lot of South Asian business owners is that there is an outsourcing restriction. So the way the bill is written, it divides, there are two categories of H-1B employers. There's something called H-1B skilled worker dependent employer, which has a very specific set of definitions that you have to fall into, and those are around percentages of employees that are H-1Bs or numbers of employees, depending on how many employees the company has. And then there's also something that's called H-1B dependent employers, which has like a different definition. And basically the restrictions around these, there's a lot of pieces around advertising for jobs, wage requirements, that kind of thing. But the piece that's really concerning a lot of South Asians, or that we're hearing is concerning a lot of South Asians, is an issue of outsourcing or outplacement. And that is that a lot of companies bring people here on H-1Bs and might place them at another company or in a different office or location. And depending on which of those two categories you fall into, an employer falls into, there are a lot of restrictions around that. So for one of them, you would have to pay a $500 fee for every person you place at another company or in a different office even. And for the other one, you can't do it at all. And so a lot of South Asian companies are worried about this, but the truth of the matter is that I don't think a lot of South Asian companies fall under those percentages and numbers. I think there are 2 or 3 in the top 10 companies that would fall into those categories. But I think the piece that we have to remember is that a lot of South Asians that come from overseas, even though they're not going to South Asian companies and they're going to American companies or other companies, are still H-1Bs and are still going to be affected by that restriction, because even though those companies aren't South Asians, the people that are coming on H-1Bs are South Asians.
Thanks, Minar. I think the employment-based immigration system, at least for me, is probably the most complicated in trying to unpack and understand as far as what's happened in the Senate bill so far, and then I think that's probably going to get even more complicated with what goes on in the House. So I just want to remind everyone that this is all kind of hard to hear and digest and understand. So SALT does have a lot of resources, and we're happy to talk with anyone if they have concerns around employment-based visas. But I want to thank Minar for laying out kind of the framework in that regard. And we are going to get to question and answer in just 1 minute. So thanks, Minar. I mentioned earlier that profiling is an issue for our community, and that we face increasing post 9/11 profiling, and it's impacted us as individuals, as a community, and as a society at large. And I just want to ask direct one quick question to Angel about profiling, and that's what are the potential issues regarding profiling in the current proposals, and what ways has Senator Cardin been involved in that dialogue? And then we're going to get to question and answer, because I think I already see a hand.
Well, basically, the current bill as it stands allows for the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Homeland Security, to designate certain regions of the world, and people who come from those particular regions to go through additional extra scrutiny when it comes to background checks and when it comes to law enforcement checks. So basically, if in conjunction with the decision of the Secretary of Homeland Security and Secretary of State, they decide that there's a particular region that's particularly hostile to American or to American interest, or that just a hotbed for all kinds of negativity, they can decide whether to people who immigrate from those regions to go a little additional or a lot more additional scrutiny throughout their legal permanent citizenship process and their legal permanent residency process and then their citizenship process. What the senator tried to do, he tried to introduce an amendment where these types of background checks, both at post, at consular post and foreign embassies, or administrative checks here in the country, would only be based not on where a person's from or their ethnicity or their race. It would be based on the intelligence that Secretary of Homeland Security and Secretary of State have gathered based on this person. So instead of just doing these broad, overreaching notions of understanding that if you're from someplace you should be subject to additional scrutiny, rather do it based on actual intelligence and what we do know, a more objective stance on how a person should be subjected to additional processing. The other thing that Senator Cardin tried to do with the Senate bill was introduce as an amendment the End Racial Profiling Act. Basically, it serves as a deterrent. It basically prohibits federal law enforcement when making routine enforcement decisions to act in a discriminatory manner based on perceptions of race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. Unfortunately, neither of these two amendments made it to the bill. However, the senator is introducing this legislation as standalone for the Senate, and currently he's going to start a series of town halls throughout the state of Maryland to try to harness more interest in the End Racial Profiling Act, which he's continuously introduced in the Senate for several Congresses now, and he's very determined on getting traction, getting this bill passed, even if it's not in the immigration reform bill, then getting it passed as a standalone bill.
And I just want to acknowledge that Senator Cardin's office has been fabulous in terms of really pushing forward on issues around profiling and really trying to create immigration reform that would protect all the civil rights of all Americans by prohibiting profiling that is inclusive and effective. So we thank you for that.
I just want to thank everyone for being so patient up to this point and really taking in all of this very kind of complicated and meaningful, I think, testimony from the community and the panelists. And now we want to open it up to question and answer. And I know we already have one question in the back. Thank you for being so patient. If you have a loud voice, then you don't need a mic. Feel free to stand where you are. If you want to come to the front and use the mic, if you could please just tell us your name and where you're from so we can all better kind of get to know one another. If you have a question that is directed at a specific panelist, just let us know. Otherwise, they can just jump in. And I just want to say we welcome questions, comments, and if you want to share your experience around immigration, we'd love to hear about it. But if you have any advice around specific situations or you need legal help, we just want to make a note that we do have some resources and we can connect you to the right people. We can do that after the town hall, but please do connect with us if you're in that situation. But we really do want to hear from you. So why don't we get started with the gentleman in the back?
My name is Arvindo. Loud enough? Yes. Call me Andy. Minar. Yeah, I actually have 3 questions.
Great.
It was for 1, but it became 3. You said it's going to go to the House, then the conference. So what is the time frame you're looking at?
So unfortunately, the House is only in session, so they're on recess right now. They're only in session, I think, 9 days in September, and I think that's right, maybe a little bit less actually. And then just a little bit more in October. We're hoping that something, thank you. We're hoping that something is going to make it through in October and then it'll go to conference. But I think from where things are right now, like there's been a lot of debate in the House, even within like the dream piece. And that bill right now, what's happened is that they've introduced 5, I think, different piecemeal bills that have passed in committee, but they haven't gone to the floor yet. So they haven't passed in the entire House yet. And they're talking about something called the KIDS Act now. We don't know the details of that. My understanding is that that would only benefit dreamers, but not allow for a pathway for other undocumented individuals. So we're hoping something will make it through in October, but we really don't know, and that's why we need everybody to reach out.
There is that time lag. You apply in April and you have to wait till October to start with your employer. Is there any provisions being made, or that you don't have to, or that limitation is being revoked?
You know, I'm not sure of the detail of that. I can look into it. I know that the way that it is now, there's a long wait to even get your H-1B status because they disappear like that once you, they reach the cap momentarily almost. I would have to look into the details of the second part of that, but they're trying to do away with some of that wait time.
And the third question, again on H-1B, there's that two category, what you call as the exempt and non-exempt, and when you transition from one employer who falls into the, let's say, not-for-profit, let's say a university, to a commercial entity, I believe you have to go through an entire process again. Has there been any talk to change that?
I think a lot of the mobility restrictions are they're trying to address those through the Senate bill. I don't know if the House bill, there's only one bill right now in the House around the skilled piece, and the job mobility pieces are not as, I don't think they're there really. I think and if there are there's not very many of them. So I could look into detail about that in the Senate bill, but they are addressing that job mobility issue there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
I can just sit here and talk.
Okay. Please tell us your name.
I'm Naina. I'm representing ASHA for Women today. But generally, my question, I guess, for Manar is, I have a lot of friends, well, not a lot, but a couple of friends who are in this, the H-4 status. And also, with working with women in ASHA, there are a lot of women who are opened up to more situations of abuse because of the relationship of the H-4 and how, you're not allowed to go out and seek employment and things like that, and just sort of makes a bad situation worse. So I was wondering if there's anything in the bill that you've heard about with H-4 status.
Sorry, I told you I was going to talk all night. So I actually meant to address this when I was talking about the employment-based system, and I forgot. So thank you so much for raising it, because it is an issue that actually affects a lot of South Asian women. And one of the pieces that we don't see within with the economic focus being so heavy, a lot of who's left out of a lot of this reform is women who don't have the same opportunities for educational advancement or developing skills overseas. But just to back up for a second, so H-4s are the spouses of H-1Bs. And under the current immigration law, they don't get work authorization. And so as a result, so I'm going to talk about it outside of the domestic violence context and then within it. So as a result, a lot of H-4s are not able to contribute to their household income, which puts more pressure on the family, and also often leads to depression for a lot of women as well, because they're not able to kind of go out and pursue whatever they want to pursue. So one of the things that a lot of our South Asian Coalition members have been advocating for many years now is for there to be an employment authorization document for H-4s. And what was proposed in the Senate bill that passed is basically language that says that they would receive automatic authorization. Now that can be revoked by the Secretary of State if there is not reciprocity with their country of origin. And what that means is that if I come from Pakistan and an American that goes to Pakistan goes to Pakistan on something similar to an H-1B, so some kind of specialty worker, and their spouse cannot work, then my authorization could be revoked. Now, in the original proposal of the Senate bill, H-4s were only going to be granted work authorization if that reciprocity existed. As it got revised and amended, it became something where my interpretation is that they would automatically get the employment authorization unless the Secretary of State revokes it. So that's a very positive change. We would love to see no restriction, but it's better than where it was. And then in the domestic violence context, there are provisions within the Senate bill that are intended to protect victims of domestic violence survivors, and there are provisions to allow for domestic violence survivors and their children to have independent status. Currently, they can only have that independent status as a VAWA petitioner or through a U visa, which is for victims of crime. But with the provisions in the Senate bill, they would be able to have their own independent status, like as what's called non-immigrant spouses as well, which would probably include H-4s.
We have another question. Gina, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that basically anytime you put someone in an immigration situation where their benefit, their status here depends on another, you will see abuse will be ubiquitous. So whether that is I came with a diplomat and my visa is connected to that employer, or whether it is in this situation, you will put that worker in such a vulnerable situation. And there's a professor out of Yale who did a ton of research around this issue, and quite a few who have mimicked those studies, and particularly impacts women. So you see a ton of both sexual and other type of worker abuses against agricultural workers under the current scheme. So it's something that we think about, I think, with every part of this bill, is how can we give workers and women, everyone, enough protection that their benefit isn't connected to some other party, right, who's going to take advantage of that.
What is the new reform for the VAWA? What is that for?
For VAWA, I don't think, and if you know the answer to
Any
this,
change? Any?
I don't think there are changes around VAWA. Yeah, I don't think there are changes around VAWA. There is an increase in the number of U visas. I believe it's about double what it was previously, and that's something in the Violence Against Women Act when they passed it this year. It's something they were trying to increase, was the U visa numbers, the cap that's placed on U visas, but they weren't able to do that because of a technicality, a constitutional technicality, and so that is in the Senate bill.
We had a question in green. Yes.
It was just actually a follow-up, Bernard, to the issue
Can you
we're
just
talking
tell us your name?
I'm sorry. I'm Kavita Babu. I'm here from Sabah, DC.
Okay, great.
The revocation for countries where there is no reciprocity, is that an individual case-by-case analysis, or is it based on the country?
I'm reading it as an individual case-by-case analysis. I don't think that it doesn't say. That's how I'm reading it. I've had some conversations with different congressional offices. That's I think kind of how it's being read and what the intention behind it is. I also think that if immigration reform passes, there's going to be so much to do that is completely not going to be the focus, and that is my hope.
Right.
Gentleman in the blue shirt? Yes, yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tarek from, I actually work at NARAL for Choice America, but that's not relevant. I wanted to ask about, speaking of cases like Minnie's, where we have trafficking victims versus domestic violence folks. I know when they reauthorized, I guess, the TVPA a couple of years ago, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, there's a separate class of visas to provide status to trafficking victims that had been in place, and I know that we did some work and I worked with the coalition, but I don't remember how it came out, and whether that was overridden or expanded in the version of the reauthorization, or the version of CIR that moved through the Senate, or if it actually did get impacted by VAWA. I'm not sure if in a case like hers, I remember there being, you had to really cooperate with prosecution or something before you could reach that status and be granted that visa, and I wasn't sure there's some sort of expansion of that, because trafficking is expanding, unfortunately, and there was a little while during Secretary Clinton's time in the State Department where people were really paying attention to it, and they seem to be leading on it, and I'm not sure if that has faded or what.
There were some statutory tweaks to it that made it better, made the Trafficking Victims Protection Act better. But I will fail you if I try to describe what they are sort of offhand. It's been a long day. But yes, it's a bit stronger, it's a bit better, it's a bit broader. But it's our sense on the ground that U visas are a lot easier to get than T visas. And so most advocates on the ground are applying for U visas are for folks who are victims of crime in this country. And so usually if you rise to the level of trafficking, you can usually get certified for a U visa because the covered crimes are also included in that. And the trafficking is a higher burden. So on the ground, we're using U visas much more than T visas.
Interesting, thank you.
My name is Vishnu Tata. I'm from ANWA, American Apollo Women Association. There are a lot of questions, but one thing somebody asked me yesterday that in this new reform, a lady came to USA on C visa, and that cannot be transferred to land visa. Her parents, like father, got asylum, and mom got, visa through or green card through father. But the daughter, who is now I think 30, just gave us some kind of just work authority to work here. Like, would she fall within this new reform or not?
I would need much more information to answer that. I don't know if anyone else wants to take a shot. I feel like it's so specific. We need to know a lot.
Not the land. She came as a crew, sea crew, in a cruise, and then and their parents didn't put her name or something. Then I don't know if she has to wait until her parents get a citizenship and apply for her daughter, or she is eligible in this.
Is she here in Maryland?
She lives in Maryland.
Okay, you can give me a call and figure that out.
Oh, okay. I'll do that.
I'll give you my card and we'll figure that out.
Yeah, I'll do that before I leave.
Yeah, and there are a number of community organizations in Maryland who, for low-income folks, are providing free legal consults or very low-cost legal consults. And in this situation, it's always best to sit down with the family and go through all the documentation and really parse it out, right? Because immigration law is so complicated.
Right.
But, Casa de Maryland every Tuesday at 8 a.m. The charities that you have on hand. So there are a lot of resources here in this area, luckily, that folks can access. And you really should, when in doubt, seek some legal consult.
Yeah,
And stay away from notarios, unlicensed attorneys. Please, please, please urge, I know it seems like we have a lot of service providers on the ground people here. Please, please, please make sure you're getting, there's tons of materials out there that USCIS has put out for anti-notario, and as did the Maryland Attorney General. So there are, for every good immigration attorney, we have 10 stories of people getting really abused and defrauded by people who say they're attorneys. All of us have lists of attorneys we trust. So please, please, please do not go to see someone's ad in the paper or something. Please call one of us and we'll give you our lists.
I just want to reiterate what Tina said, and that's we hope that after the town hall, everyone can connect with the panelists and the speakers and make sure that you get people's names and email addresses. And if for some reason you have to leave and you aren't able to do that, make sure that you email us at SALT, and we're happy to connect you with the right people and provide you with resources going forward. We definitely want to make sure that everyone that's here and everyone that they support has access to these resources. I think I saw another hand in the crowd. Yes, the gentleman in front.
Hi, my name is Yusuf. Two kind of linked questions. One, I guess Manar kind of touched on the big challenges, like family changes to the family-based system, profiling, which I think Dr. Angel talked about. But I guess kind of thinking about the next 2 months and immigration reform coming through, what are you prioritizing? And I guess the second half of that is what kind of channels or what kind of mechanisms do you think or do you plan on using to kind of push for policy change?
I mean, we can probably all answer that.
Yeah, I bet we all have our own
We all probably have different
favorite.
answers to that. I think, so from our perspective, like those are two big pieces in the Senate bill, the family-based changes and the profiling pieces that we're really concerned with. But I think one of the things that I'm constantly reminding myself is that though the bill passed in the Senate, it's still not over in the Senate because we don't know what's going to happen in the House, and then they have to reconcile the two. So while the focus is really on the House and setting up meetings and doing whether it's, and for us a lot of it is around meetings in coalition with other organizations, but for just for individuals, I would say meetings and phone calls. And one of the things I've heard a lot from offices of members in the House and the Senate is that they're not hearing the time this time around from the community members, and they want to hear more, and they log those. They log the calls, they log the emails, they log all of it, so it really does matter. So I think we're focused on, we always go back to we have a set of principles that I believe is over there on that table. We always go back to all the principles when we meet with different offices, and then we pick a couple to focus in on, and one that we're you know, because those two, the family-based piece and the profiling piece really affect the South Asian community, those are two pieces that we're definitely very focused on, but we always keep it in the broader picture to include the pathway to citizenship, because people often forget that that includes the South Asian community, as well as the employment-based system. Even though it's in there, it's not perfect. There's a lot of issues with it as well, worker protections, asylum and refugee stuff. Like we always go back to the big picture, because we really don't believe that any one of them is affected by themselves.
So obviously one major piece is legalization, right? So that the amazing people who shared their stories up here with me actually have a path, because you've got to think how frustrating for so many folks who have been here 10, 20, 30 years, have contributed to this economy, have US born kids, and they have no option to get their status right, and all want to. So that's one. Two, and this is a little in the weeds, but so under the bill as it's written, right, people are going to get a provisional status, and then the path to actually becoming a resident, right, papers, it could be 10, 13 years, and most likely will be about 13 years. During that time, there's a provision that says folks cannot be unemployed. They need to be continuously employed. They cannot be unemployed for more than 60 days. So think about your seasonal workers, in 13 years, the economy is going to go up and down. These days, I have friends who are lawyers who are laid off for longer than that, right? Despite all efforts to try to find employment. So one of our big pushes is just to try. We're not saying get rid of it, because we didn't think we could win that. We love that, but we didn't think we could win that. So our idea is let volunteer service be a substitution, right? What a better thing. If you're unemployed, you find yourself in a situation beyond your control, that you are finding yourself, you cannot work, you're unemployed, why not be able to substitute that with volunteer service, with the government, or with a nonprofit, right? And there are sort of other provisions in the world of immigration law that set you up for that we could really base it on. So that's the other thing. And three, you guys, we got to be out in the streets. If we are not loud, we are going to lose this thing. Or these Republicans in the House are going to pass everything that's bad and nothing that's good, right? We're going to end up with something that hurts us more than helps us. Our Casa Medellin, our amazing organizers, are out there bombing these, not actually bombing, but going in, doing actions, getting arrested at Republican events, at these town halls. These guys are home. These guys are in their home districts right now, having town halls and having a nice old time talking about how we're going to keep these people out of our country, right? So it's so important that we are there and bringing our voice to the forefront. Casa de Maryland is helping organize, so I don't know if April 10th, if any of you guys were out at the Capitol, these things matter. So October 8th at 12 noon on the National Mall, be there or be square, and I don't want to hear any complaints if this bill doesn't pass, okay, if you're not there. It's really, really important. It's an amazing experience. Bring your kids, bring your families, if you're teachers, bring your students, bring your staff, bring whoever. It's such a great experience, and you get to sort of, get out all those frustrations via yelling and screaming in front of the Capitol. This stuff matters. It does work. We've seen it in the past, and we're remembering the civil rights struggle of our past, right? These days, this week, tomorrow, the 50th anniversary. So I can't stress enough how important this is.
I don't have anything further to add other than those two tremendous answers. I would just echo what Gina just said in terms of getting out there and making people like me hear your voice. Because on the other side, trust me, I'm on that phone constantly. People, even in Maryland, which is a very progressive state, I'm very proud to live in it, they'll call me and they have no fear of telling me off and sending a negative message to the senator, because they're in their families, and they have no fear of picking up the phone and making that call. So you shouldn't have fear of picking up the phone and making that call. Your families in those states where, are not as progressive as Maryland, they shouldn't have fear of picking up that call. In a former life, I was escorted by the police by disrupting a town hall, an anti-immigrant reform that was being passed at a specific town in Nebraska. We were escorted by police by being that dissenting voice, that we knew that we were going to be the only ones there. So, I mean, it's obviously easier if your family members or yourself have some status, but it's going to take a lot more voices. It's going to take a lot more standing strong and together in order to get this passed, especially in the political climate that we're living in right now.
We have about 10 more minutes for questions. I know the gentleman, Senator, you had a question.
I'm going to state my name for a good reason. The question comment is about misbehavior on part of federal employees, and I'm a federal employee, so it doesn't make sense. So I've been a supporter of SALT right from its inception, and primarily in the senator's staff, and I'm a supporter of the senator. Every time there's an election, I have a big poster in front of my home. I have 2 stickers on my car, the first and second. And I go to meetings alongside our boards, and I have presented Ben card names. But the point is this: it's much easier to round up an innocent, hardworking woman than a violent rapist. Typically, what's happening, I'm part of secondary federal law enforcement, so I deal with computer stuff. I know quite a lot about it. I might have a biased opinion, but we deal with the rogues more than we good people. But sequester is only going to affect certain combination of libertarians and progressives that want cuts and down. We're fed up of somebody who wants to round up some innocent woman who works and sits about in wine until midnight and doesn't have the courage to go and face the wild breakers. So I think what you really ought to do, progressives in Congress, is to get ready to impose some sort of, further cuts where they misuse taxpayers' money. And I'll be more than glad to. I wanted to say this a little publicly so that I can have a chance to talk to everybody, but I'll be more than glad to meet with anyone afterwards and talk. Because we are going to have cuts. I mean, one of my questions is to the other, what do you think will happen when the October cuts go into effect? And we might get a continuing resolution for the first 2 weeks, but the deficit of the spending will have to be cut if there's no further extension. Of the debt, which will happen in the second week, according to the Obama administration. By the way, the White House strongly doesn't want this sort of thing happening. I happen to belong to the PPI, I'm on the board of DOD Commission, and I know that we don't want misuse. The government, my colleagues do it all the time, even my progressive colleagues do it. They will misuse their position right and left and cannot control. So I would say cut the budget as much as you can from misbehaving employees.
Thank you so much for your comment and for sharing. I think because we only have such a limited amount of time and the focus tonight is on immigration, maybe that question...
Just to do it immigration. You don't want people using law enforcement dollars paid for by the taxpayer to harass, say, even someone like me.
Okay. If someone wants to quickly address that, and then we'll take the next question.
Well, that's kind of what the senator's amendment had to do with immigration reform, and it was trying to save actually taxpayer dollars by prohibiting profiling. So when you go into the profiling section, you basically have whether it's profiling entire regional areas of the world and people who come from there, or just based on federal law enforcement's perception of somebody being here illegally just because of their ethnic, racial, religious beliefs. It's a waste of, I will agree with you, it's a waste of taxpayer dollars if federal law enforcement has to go and do something that has completely been proven ineffective. So that's what the senator is trying to do right now, is trying to get people surrounding the issue of ending racial profiling, and ultimately, saving taxpayer dollars by eliminating these useless and pointless enforcement actions that have proven to be ineffective.
One more question?
This is to the student. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. There were millions of people for us to hear. We just I want to know what keeps you inspired and motivated in your activism and the work you're
misguided. They didn't stop living their lives as normal human beings. They, you know, always interacted with the community. They always knew what was the right thing to do. They always harbored the right sort of feelings in me. In fact, I asked my dad one day, I said, so why aren't we reporting your employer to the authorities? And he said he has a family too. And I knew that I had huge expectations and huge shoes to fill with that sort of, thinking. And plus, if I stop the struggle now, I have to remember that there are so many millions out there just like me, fighting my fight. So if I stop fighting theirs, it wouldn't be fair and it would be a balanced, support. So that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I would agree with what Pratista had to say, and I echo her same belief, where a lot of the time, the only way I can see my parents is through Skype, and the only way I can see my one grandmother who's still remaining is through Skype, and I promised her, I said, Grandma, I'm going to be there next Christmas, and we're going to celebrate together. And moreover, I'm so glad I've gotten a chance to be involved in the movement and meet so many other young undocumented kids, and just to hear their stories. I know that I'm in a very privileged opportunity where I can go to school. My parents are financially better than most of these kids, and it's my responsibility to speak about their stories. My friends who work, full-time and also try to go to school. My friends who are taking care of their younger brothers and sisters because their own parents have been deported. And I know that they can't be out here doing this work because they're so preoccupied, and it's our responsibility to speak up for them.
Do you want to interpret the question so that we can answer this? Sure.
Any question നിങ്ങളുടെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് നിങ്ങൾ ആരാണ് നിങ്ങളെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത് നിങ്ങളുടെ ഹോപ്സ് എന്താണ്
our own community members and our own stories, right? To get out there and make a difference when it comes to this issue. And we hope that you'll join SALT in doing that. We have an immigration blog story documentation project that you can find on our website, www.saalt.org. And then secondly, we are doing advocacy. We're out there. You can tell our amazing policy director, Minar, has been talking about all the policy issues we're working on. And so we are out there doing this work, and we just really would love to have you join us. So I think my son wants the last word. What did you want to say? Go ahead. Put this together. You can hold the mic for me, okay? So I want to thank Jasmeet, who's been amazing, joined us a few months ago. I want to thank Avni, our Maryland Outreach Coordinator, who put this entire event together with the logistics. Raise your hand, Avni. I want to thank Victoria and Arya and Manpreet, our staff, for providing so much support. So we're a small team, but a very dedicated team, and we're committed to our community. So with that, I will turn it back over to you. Okay?
Okay, I'll go without the mic. I just wanted to bring Avni up. Avni, I just wanted to have you come up quickly and talk a little bit about our outreach work.
Okay, hi. There's some really powerful words and stories tonight, and as Deepa mentioned, I do outreach for SALT, mainly trying to get legal permanent residents to apply for citizenship, actually through a greater program called Citizenship Maryland, under a grant from Casa de Maryland. And I was going to talk a little bit about, what qualifies to become a citizen, who can qualify, what you need, but if anyone's interested in that, you can connect with me afterwards. But I just want to encourage you and for you to tell everyone you know that if you are a legal permanent resident, definitely apply for citizenship. It's not the same being an LPR and being a citizen. We are not as powerful of a community if we are just holding green cards, but doing outreach, I've met a lot of community members who feel very safe and secure, who say, I have a green card, I don't need to apply, I'm doing okay. And so if you know anyone like that, definitely encourage them to apply for citizenship, because it's not the same thing, and we're a lot stronger when we are citizens. So, and if you have any other questions about citizenship, about resources in Montgomery County English classes, legal resources, connect with me. You know, some of our co-sponsors, Casa de Maryland and the APA LRC, also offer these types of resources, and SALT can connect you to other organizations, and we have some materials on the table.
Thanks everyone, and I just want to remind everyone there's food that will go to waste, so please help yourself before you leave. And wanted to just reiterate that our thank you to the co-sponsors, and many of you who are actually represented here. Please do share your information with all the participants, and please definitely check out our website, www.salt.org, to get more resources, and also to share your stories on our blog, because we do have an immigration blog. So thanks again to everyone, and please do connect with each other before you leave.